That's computer. Okay, I'm recording. Go.
Nice one. Right. So a web API, you're having a look at all the data that's in there. You're looking at, because it's order entry, customers and vendors, orders, order headers, order details, inventory. Those are the sort of the main table. I'll just show you the customer, start you on the customer and work our way down. And one thing you'll notice, it is really, really sparky fast. So this has returned the JSON, a JSON sort of structure containing all the customer details. So that's your basic thing. The first thing you want is who's all my customers. I'll whiz through these quickly. The second thing you want from this sort of an API is the ability to sort of zoom in on an individual item. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to have here looking at customer number 4. Okay, and it shows you the customer, and it will also show you the headers for that customer in this sort of child section here. Okay, so you can get a list or you can get a specific item. The other thing that you might want to do is, if you've got something like orders or invoices, you don't want to get every single invoice. So you want some kind of paging. So I'll just show you the paging. And this is a list of orders, but only the first page. And it defaults to, well, it looks like it's 9 items. I don't know why it's on 9 items. I thought it was more than that, but there we go. As you're paging, you want to say, oh, can we have page 1, page 2, page 3, etc. What we're going to do is we're going to get page 1, which is the second page, don't forget, with a page size of 3, so 4th, 5th, 6th elements in the vendors table. And there we go, 4th, 5th, 6th vendors. Okay, another thing you would want to do is, when you are getting a list,
Sean, your connection seems to have gone. Or maybe mine's gone.
Here, I'm just, is it my connection's breaking up?
Yeah, you're dropping in and out.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
Actually, it's actually saying my connection's unstable, so it's maybe not you.
So yeah, you should be able to look at a list, but look at items, child items in that list. That's what we use this is.full sort of command for. The other things you want to be able to do is you want to be able to order. So you want a list, but you want it in, say, city order. Here's a list of our vendors, but in city order. You want to be able to constrain your list. So here we've got a list of cities that are greater than the letter P. We've got San Diego there, San Francisco. And sometimes you want to be able to do a between. So between San and San X. And there we've got cities between that thing. So it's a fairly simple web API, but there's a lot of power in it. Here we're getting the vendors, we're ordering by the city. What we want to be able to do is order it by the zip, and we're ordering it by the zip. Now, because we're doing it through SQL, and we will see a bit more about that in detail, we aren't using any indexes or anything like that. So, and this is, I suppose, one of the advantages of using SQL for your initial sort of querying via your web API is you don't have to say, oh, index 9 is this, so we can actually offer it in this order. You can just straight away say, customer, user of the web API, you can order it however you want, you can get which bits of it you want, etc., etc. So that's the web API. I've demonstrated that. That is very exciting. How do you do this? So there's two parts of this. There's the developer interface, and then there's the nuts and bolts of it. And I just want to show you the developer interface, because I think a good developer interface means that something like this, you should be able to set this up relatively quickly. If you're writing JSON for every single part of your interface, if you're building up JSON, if you're writing separate SQL queries, it makes it a pain. So what I sat down and I said, well, how do I want to define an object which allows me to view customers? And really, all I want to do is I want to point, I want to say, yeah, give me a web API for the customers table. And because I don't want to let people see everything, I want to say a list of fields. And that's pretty much everything that you would want in your developer interface. I mean, there's some things you can subclass, and we'll get to, but keep it simple, developer interface. And let's have a look, first of all, at the customer. Ignore this thing about Swagger. This API actually self-documents using the Swagger interface, but it's a REST handler. The table is the customer, the path is customer. We pass it an array of fields using string split to array. So we pass it an array of fields, and ignore link table for the moment. That just links your child tables. And that is it. And if you create a REST handler like this, you can really create lots of them very, very quickly. There are other features, because you're saying, well, I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to do the other. I'll whiz through those quickly. You may, for example, want to be able to say, I only want a subset in this interface. I want to have some calculated fields. I want to put maybe two tables together. I want to have a grouped table. So you have this with function. And what you can do is you can say, essentially, you can constrain it, or you can create a pretend table using, I believe they might be called CTRs or something, but you essentially define in SQL a pretend table. And this pretend table is called active inventory, and it's defined as select star from inventory where status equals A active. So inventory, if you would look at through the web interface, you only see the active items. So that's the with. Vendor. Vendor's just a standard one. We'll talk about link table. So no, we'll find one with a link table before we talk about link tables. Oh, this is the other thing. This is the next thing. Order headers. Sometimes you want calculated fields. If you've got description validation tables, you're not going to be able to pull that via SQL. So what we have, ignore the fact that that's there. You probably have that in another package somewhere. But very simply, we have this field here, calculated fields, and again, there is an array of strings, and we say display terms is one of our calculated fields, and then we have a function called display terms, which returns the value. It looks up from the validation object the description of the code. So that's, again, for the developer, they're not doing any of the heavy lifting. They want to display a calculated field. They put it in the calculated fields, and then they write a function with the exact same name. Okay. Query auto detail. Okay. Link tables, again, I want to make this super simple. With link tables, you just say, this RESTful interface, which is order detail, it has a link to inventory. So it creates a subtable table. It points to a RESTful interface. So that's what that object name is another RESTful or REST handler. It says what the name of it is, and it says the fields that you link. Right, is there anything more? Okay, and that's all the features. I talked about using with handlers. With here, what this does is it creates a pretend table. Again, I forget the name of them, called min-max, and it grabs the minimum order date and the maximum order date for each customer. And we can actually look at that. It's
Sean, they're called CTEs.
CTEs, thank you. Min, max. So that SQL, is it min, max? That SQL took me, a couple of minutes to write. And now we have a JSON interface. Essentially, you're saying to people, here's your orders, here's the minimum, here's the minimum date that this customer ordered something, and the last date that the customer ordered something, and all those features which we talked about, the searching, the ordering, that is all there. So we can say on this, let's have a look at the orders, but let's order it by the last order date, which we've called max order date. Sort equals. Okay, and there you've got it. So again, the interface is simple, but actually the output that people have access to is relatively full, really. Okay, so that's what it is. You've seen it in action. You've seen the developer interface. I'm going to show you how I've been doing some of these things, and this is, I suppose, the core of the talk, which is, how would you do this? And I've said you do it by your leveraging SQL. Let me go back to my presentation. There's two parts to this class. There's the REST handler and the REST writer. The REST handler does the stuff for HTTP. So it produces the JSON, it shows the JSON, it takes the queries that you put into the address bar, and it splits them out so they can be passed to something else. And processed by something else. So this is the REST handler side of things. You'll notice there's nothing in calculator fields with function whitelist, anything like that. We're just pushing everything through this REST writer. That does all the SQL talking to that does, and that's, I suppose, where the majority of the code is. All this stuff, converting queries to key values. All we're doing is we're doing some conversions, true to yes, true to one, yes to one, and we're finding these parameters, and we're putting these parameters in a parameter list. There's also authorization in this. You haven't seen any authorization, but this comes with built-in authorization. If we have a look at the web app, you create this function here called check user, and check user, it can call whatever authentication system you've got in place. But if it returns true with the username and the password that comes in, it'll give you a web token, and then that web token is used in the header of any of the HTTP queries, HTTP calls you make. It's a pretty standard way of doing it. So REST handler gets the data from the user, or over HTTP, and pushes it at the REST writer. This, all that sort of functionality which we saw, it's less than 500 lines of code, and I'm quite verbose as well in terms of how I code. And what we do is we clean up the parameters that come in. So for example, if you say is dot greater than, we clean that up so we make sure nobody's injecting any SQL. But all we do is we say, for example, let me see if I can find a bit of code that does it. We get each of the, where is it? Each of the, there should be a loop in here somewhere. Okay, when we're ordering it, so for example, when we said order.by, it gets the field, it checks the field is valid, and it just builds up the SQL. So you'd say order.by equals customer, and it would say in your SQL query, it would say space order space by space customer. It's just building SQL up a bit at a time. The same with the with statement, it just goes on the top of the SQL statement. So SQL is doing all the hard lifting. That is my point. With the, when you say greater than P, it converts the GT to a chevron pointing forward, and it just puts the value that you've got there. It makes sure that you haven't escaped it or you're not doing any SQL injection, and then just puts it on the query. The query gets built up tiny bit by tiny bit. There's a with, then there's the fields that you asked for in the fields list, then there's your query greater, less than whatever it is, and then there's your what else is there? I think that, then if you want a page, we're just using this offset and fetch next. So again, completely, we're leveraging the SQL. We're not doing any, all we're doing is converting one set of words to another set of words. We're converting what the users typed into the bar, and we're just doing search and replace, really. Safe search and replace, because again, as I said, you don't want people just telling you to delete your database. So the page size and fetch next is your offset and your rows. Build the SQL.
Is the whitelist a security feature for which fields are allowed?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And then that all gets pushed to an SQL call, which we have somewhere in here. With the subtables, what it does, all it does then with the subtables is it builds the link to the other table as a join command, and then it gets the query from the object that you passed in the subquery. So it just each REST writer knows how to make its own query, so it just asks the REST writer that is a child of it, how do you make your query, and it just runs it and then adds the selection. I don't think actually we don't do a join, we just have an extra selection in the list. Right. And then the query, as it pushes it to SQL, it brings back, I'll show you the query functions. SQL helpers.pkg just brings back a two-dimensional array, and it converts that two-dimensional array to a JSON object. These are my helper functions. So that's how REST Writer works. I'm just thinking, if you were to do this yourself, I mean, I hope that I'm sort of giving pointers as to how I would do it. But if I'm not sort of making it clear how how to do it, just ask me. Yeah. What was I going to say then? Right. Your SQL helper functions. If you're using SQL and you haven't got like a package called SQL helper or SQL cleaner or equivalent, then you need one. So for example, my SQL helper, it has, you know, take some SQL and give me an array of integers. I use that all the time to get the IDs for a bunch of records. I have a function that does the same for dates and for strings. I have a function that returns a single SQL result, because sometimes you just want, you know, like how many records are there. And if you don't, again, if you don't have like just as a single line function call, it just makes life harder, I think. And then this, which is the work beast, data for SQL statements. And you pass it SQL and it returns you a 2D string and a list of columns. Yeah, you get your list of columns using SQL statement attribute. And you say, give me SQL column attribute label. You've got there, you call the SQL, you've got your column names, and you've got all your data. You can put that in a grid, you can push it to a CSV file, and you're always using the same function. So if you don't have a function like this, get one, is what I'm saying. SQL call procedure for when you're dropping tables by accident, all that sort of thing. And finally, SQL clean. I spent an inordinate amount of time on this build SQL command. I will share this, and we probably won't need it in the future when data access has proper parameterized queries, but this it fakes being a parameterized query. So it works very much the same as SQL format, but it is designed specifically to stop you from injecting SQL. And it does this with these converts. It works out what the type is that you've passed in. You pass in a variant, yeah, or a number of variants actually. It works out what the type is, and then it converts it. So it converts dates to SQL format dates, and it converts strings to escaped safe strings. And then the final helper, this is like a 2-line function, and this, I love this, I just use it all the time if you haven't got this. What it allows you to do is it allows you to embed in quite a readable way SQL statements into your code. And if you stop them in a debugger, it also adds carriage returns and new lines onto your query. So if you stop in the debugger, you can just grab that SQL statement out of your debugger, paste it into something like SSMS or whatever you do to run ad hoc queries, and you can see it all, and you don't need to, you know, reformat it or anything like that. I'll just show you one of these in action. So there you've got like the query, and I think that's quite readable. So this, we are coming, I think, to the end. What I've done is I've shown you it in action. I've shown you the RESTful sort of GET interface in action. I've shown you the developer interface for it, how it can be made in such a way that developers can basically just knock code up really quickly. I've shown you some of the techniques that I use to do that, but essentially I just create an SQL query from the parameters that people have given to me. I'll let SQL do everything. And I've shown you some of my SQL helper functions, and that, I hope it will, I probably only, oh goodness me, half an hour. Hey. And that concludes my talk on leveraging SQL in web services. So if you've got questions or you want to say anything, now's the time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean.